Alexey Navalny in the dock this Tuesday, but who's the one on trial in the court of public opinion? First poisoned, then jailed, the anti-corruption crusader sentenced to the maximum 3.5 years behind bars for violating the parole in a 2014 money laundering conviction. He couldn't attend his see his parole authorities because he was in Germany, convalescing after being poisoned. Tens of thousands taken to the streets over the past 2 weeks in Russia. Last Sunday alone, police detained nearly 6,000, numbers unmatched since Soviet times. They're fired up, particularly after Navalny posted a video that's been seen more than 107 million times so far on YouTube of what critics are calling Putin's palace on the Black Sea. The Kremlin denies that it's his. How bothered really are the Russians, and how bothered is Vladimir Putin? Remember, he's seen off many a critic or a dissident in his 2 decades at the top. In Navalny, though, the 68-year-old Russian president faces a new sort of challenger, plugged in, publicity savvy, and who, in this bold new age of digital transparency, draws attention to an age-old patronage system that up to now had been, well, cloaked in mystery and intrigue. Is it enough, though, to rattle the system and the high halls of power? Today in the France 24 debate, we're looking at the sentencing of Alexey Navalny. Joining us from Moscow, Katerina Kotrikadze, host at independent broadcaster TV Rain. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Ekaterina Kopylova is advisor to the Russian ambassador to France. Thanks for joining us from Paris.
Thank you for the invitation.
And also in the French capital, Craig Capitas, contributing editor to Quartz and the author of Bear Hunting with the Politburo. How are you?
Good, Francois.
The France 24 debate on Facebook and Twitter, hashtag F24debate. Before we go to our panel, let's go to Moscow and correspondent Theo Mertz. Theo, it's in now, the verdict, and again, Alexey Navalny getting the maximum sentence.
Yes, this wasn't a surprise at all, not for Navalny, not for any of his supporters, but it is a huge decision and will have a monumental impact on Russia, not just for the opposition, but also for the Kremlin. His supporters are already saying they want to rally in downtown Moscow. Riot police are already there and preventing that from happening. But this is going to go much, much wider than tonight. This is about President Putin's rule. This is about how the opposition is treated, and it just remains to be seen how the opposition is going to react to this, whether there are going to be further protests like we've seen over the last 2 weeks, huge protests all across the country, thousands of arrests when those rallies have happened. It seems very likely that those will continue, and we just have to see what the consequences of that will be for the Kremlin and for Russia.
Yeah, and the news is just fresh, Theo, but there are these calls for immediate protests, they say. The question now will be whether, with Alexey Navalny in jail, the activists can keep up the momentum.
Yes, it'll be very interesting to see, but also the interesting thing that we've seen since Navalny has been poisoned, since he's been in Germany, either in this in the coma that he was in after his nerve agent poisoning, or while he was recovering, is that the opposition movement here is not limited to Alexey Navalny. He has many followers, he has many supporters. There are other high-profile activists who have been carrying on his work in his absence, and that is exactly what they're going to try to do now. It's not that Navalny's in jail and suddenly the opposition movement comes to a halt. They are rallying, and they are going to try and keep this momentum up, both tonight and at protests in the future.
All right, we saw images there of his wife Yulia leaving the courtroom. Theo, Navalny, during this one-day trial, he seemed very relaxed there in his hoodie with his hands in his pocket, jousting with the prosecution.
Yes, well, in a way, Navalny was in his element there. He had a big audience. He had an international audience, possibly for the last time, most likely in in several years, and he's used to these kind of situations. He's been prosecuted before, he's been jailed many times before, and this is what he does. That's his job, that's his role as the leader of the opposition, to show up the Russian state, to criticize it with these rhetorical flourishes that we saw today. He called President Putin, or he said that President Putin would go down in history as the poisoner of the underpants. That's a reference to how Novichok, the nerve agent, was believed to have been administered to Mr. Navalny. So he certainly he was relaxed. He was cracking jokes. He was railing against the system that has jailed him, and which he said tried to poison him. So yes, this may be his last performance in public for some time.
For some time, indeed. 2 years and 8 months. With time deducted for house arrest. Theo Mertz, thanks for that live update from Moscow. Let me turn to you, Katerina Kotrikadze. Of course, there's an appeal that's been launched. Do the hopes of the activists rest on, again, these public appearances, or these these appearances by Navalny himself now? What's the strategy for those activists?
Well, they will definitely go out on the streets. This is what we can understand already. And I'm just watching television, that live broadcast of TV Rain, where I actually work, and we can see that people are planning actually going out right now. It's 9 o'clock in the evening in Moscow, 9 and something. So I suppose that there would be some actions from the opposition. But the problem is that Navalny is the only leader of the opposition right now in Russia. There is no other person. His colleagues, for example, from his foundation, Anti-Corruption Foundation, they're all detained, or they don't have any opportunity to go out and to do something and to coordinate the actions of the opposition activists. Others are outside of Russia, for example, in Great Britain, and this is a problem. But the rallies of last Sunday and Saturday before, they showed the Russian society that it's really possible. It's actually possible to go out and to coordinate the actions without any leaders. And also, we can understand and we can see that the international interests, the interest of the diplomats who work here in Moscow is really high. This is unprecedented. No one can remember that ambassadors of 18 countries would visit the trial, the court session, and this is what happened today in Russian court. No one was actually waiting for Navalny to be released. Everyone understood, and he really understood, Navalny himself, that he would be detained. But still, the pressure is really high. And the question is, would Vladimir Putin hear the signals that come from the United States, the Great Britain, from France, the other EU countries? And just now we have a breaking news from from Great Britain and from the United States of America. They are asking, demanding the immediate release of Alexey Navalny. Of course, he would not be released. Vladimir Putin will not listen to them. But the question is, would there be strict sanctions, and what kind of sanctions would be there after this decision of the court? 2 years and 8 months behind the bars. It's really serious for the person who was just released from the hospital after his poisoning. And another very important factor here is that his the decision. I'm sorry. I will just add one thought that he is now detained and sentenced because of the case which was declared by the European Court of Human Rights as a total failure. And Navalny was declared an innocent person, and even Russian government was obliged to pay the fine to Navalny of 20,000, I think, euros. I mean, this is a case which is. Everyone understands that Navalny was innocent there, so it's going to have serious consequences. Definitely.
Yeah. Ekaterina Kopylova, sometimes it's difficult for journalists to express in a clear manner when you have a complicated corruption case, for instance. But here, you have a man sentenced for not seeing his parole officer while he was being treated for poisoning. It's pretty straightforward. The optics don't look good, do they, for the authorities?
Well, indeed, the hearing of today and the sentence, the verdict that followed the hearing showed once again that Russia is a state of law. Why? Because in a state of law, whenever you violate the law, you pay the consequences. And this is exactly what happened today. Mr. Navalny was sentenced to a real prison time because he had violated, indeed, the conditions of his parole release. He violated them because he did not respect the obligation to go to his parole officer twice a month. Indeed, he was in Germany for some time following the events that had happened in August, and which some persons say that they were related to a poisoning by a toxic agent called Novichok. Yet the Russian authorities, official authorities, have not received any official indication, any official proof that the poisoning had actually taken place. We had sent numerous requests to our German colleagues, to our French colleagues, and to our Swedish colleagues in order to ask them to provide us with official proof showing the poisoning with the Novichok. All those requests were systematically ignored. Mr. Navalny himself, judging by his activities on the social network, had recovered pretty quickly. That is why the decision of today was largely founded in law.
Largely founded in law, you say. Again, you're going to have a hard time convincing most people. Let me ask you, Ekaterina, the fact that while he was recovering, you had that prank phone call where you have on audio tape those who poisoned him admitting to what they'd done. And then you had that video that's been seen, 107 million times so far on YouTube, the last time I checked, showing that so-called Putin's palace. Did it make it impossible for the sentence to be anything other? How much did that weigh on the sentence this Tuesday?
Neither the call... Oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Ekaterina Kopylova. Go ahead.
Sorry.
Sure.
Neither the call nor the clip putting on the scene the so-called Putin's place provide actually any legal proof of the reality of those allegations. The call could have been done by anyone to anyone. The clip that I have seen does not show any official document, any paper that shows actually that President Putin is the owner of this palace. That is why I personally believe that these things are rather closer to defamation than to a real something real that is actually conducive to a public protests.
And yet we've seen all those arrests that have taken place over the last 2 weeks. Craig Kapitas, that video seen on YouTube, how much of an impact is it having?
If you look elsewhere in
Craig
Europe...
Kapitas, let me put it to Craig.
Sorry?
Let me put it to Craig Kapitas.
Never argue with two Katarinas. Пожалуйста. It's having a huge impact. It makes good television, and despite one's own personal passions towards Navalny, history is not in his favor. He is looking to overthrow the Putin regime. Now, whether you're for that or against that, and I think we have our other two guests, we know what sides they're on. Let me try and take a middle road here. No Russian government has ever been overthrown without the intervention of the military. It was true with the Bolsheviks. It was true in 1990, and I was there to chronicle that. And the only time it was ever not successful was in the 1600s with the Streltsy. Now, what we have going on here, what we're seeing right now, is a passion play being run out. But there is no indication that President Putin is going to back down on this. History says he won't back down. In fact, one of his predecessors, Peter the Great, he didn't just poison people who he didn't like. He took approximately 2,000 people out and hung them from the parapets of the Kremlin, and then had the court jesters run them through the streets, whipping them and beheading them. It is a very brutal place. So despite all the social media that we're seeing, and despite the passions, I come back to a very fundamental question. How many divisions does Navalny have? None. He's got great social media. And the great irony of it from a historical perspective is that Navalny is the textbook definition of a Bolshevik, which in Russian means man of the majority. And Putin is a Menshevik, which actually means definition, a man of the minority.
All right.
And that's the situation that we're seeing being played out now.
Craig, let me argue the point with you here, because, he doesn't have a physical army behind him, but what we have heard from Navalny is a defiance. Let's listen to what he had to say last week after there were another wave of those mass arrests.
У вас не получится запугать. На самом деле мы большинство. Те десятки миллионов людей, которых обокрала эта власть, не удастся запугать, несмотря на то, что...
So unafraid, he says there, Craig Kapitas. Can you hear us? Craig, can you hear us? Oh, you've lost the earpiece.
Yes, we can hear you. Sorry.
The joys of live television.
Yeah, they came out. You
Okay.
know. Provocatsi.
All right. You heard there Navalny saying you won't succeed in intimidating us. Has the veneer gone?
Look, I don't doubt Navalny's passion. I don't doubt his righteousness. I don't doubt that there are millions upon millions of Russians who believe in him, who want to see the Putin regime overthrown. But what I look at, as someone who, a trained Kremlinologist at Harriman, I look for indicators. And the most important indicator of a sea change in Russia, because of Navalny, was about a week ago, when a retired lieutenant general by the name of Savely Tessis, who was a pretty high-ranking military man in the internal military division, kind of Russia's National Guard, he released released a statement telling Putin, or asking Putin, to tell Russians who owned this palace. Now that was remarkable, because it was that kind of talk from the military which predicated the coup in 1990, the overthrow of communism. It was talk like that that predicated the Bolshevik Revolution and the Aurora firing its shot to launch the attack on the Winter Palace. So the next thing that you do, if you want to look at this logically, and I can tell you the diplomats are doing this, you go to a newspaper in Russia called Krasny Vezdya, Red Star. It's the military newspaper. And you look for indicators in Red Star. Now, I've read it every day for the past couple of weeks. And there are no indicators that anyone in the military or any units are going to come out of the barracks to support the Navalchiks. It's just not there. Those indicators were there back in 1990 prior to the overthrow of Gorbachev and the communist system. There were editorials and commentaries in Red Star, the military newspaper, that suggested this was going to happen. Right now, any prudent reading of the situation is we're not seeing this.
All right, we're going to pick up on that point. When we come back, you're watching the France 24 debate. Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's the France 24 debate, and we're watching reactions to the sentencing of anti-corruption crusader Alexey Navalny in Moscow at the term of a one-day trial where he jousted with the prosecution. He got the maximum, 3.5 years. He'll serve 2 years and 8 months of that. With us from Moscow, Katerina Kotritadze, host at independent broadcaster TV Rain. Ekaterina Kopylova is advisor to the Russian ambassador here in Paris. And in the French capital, we're joined as well by Craig Kopitas, contributing editor to Quartz and the author of Bear Hunting with the Politburo. We were talking about the buildup to this trial and that YouTube video that's been seen so many times where Navalny denounces that so-called Putin's palace on the Black Sea. Well, last week, Russian oligarch and Putin confidant Arkady Rotenberg decided to clear the air about it.
Уже теперь это не секрет, я могу это подтвердить. Я являюсь бенефициаром этого объекта. Теперь уже это не секрет. Когда я приобретал это, у меня была мысль сделать там апарт-отель. И я к этой мысли двигаюсь и пытаюсь это сделать. Там шикарное место, там, конечно, есть очень много сложностей, которые остались и по наследству. То есть там очень неправильно было изначально много чего сделано, приходится сейчас переделывать. Но в целом, я думаю, что это в конце концов оправдает цель, которую я хочу достигнуть.
All right, so there's the explanation of Arkady Rotenberg. Katerina Kotritadze, how much has this video impacted people where you are?
It did not impact anyone, actually, because, everyone was waiting for someone from Putin's friends to say that it was his or hers, and Arkady Rotenberg is a very well-known person here in Russia, as a person from the inner circle of Russian president, a person who actually owns a lot here in Russia because he is a friend of Vladimir Putin. He is a person which is a symbol of the corruption for a lot of people here, a lot of people who support or do not support Navalny, doesn't matter. But we all know here that there is a problem with the corruption in this country. So no one was surprised. And everyone, is laughing after this video and laughing after Rotenberg has said that it was his palace, his castle on the Black Sea. And, it's really, really funny. Everyone is discussing now how predictable the authorities of Russia are. I mean, everyone understood that something would be said, and this is their explanation. It's just ridiculous, actually.
But you heard Craig Kopitas say that the cards, nonetheless, remain stacked in the Kremlin's favor.
I would not agree with all due respect, because actually the argument that the people do not write the articles about support of Alexey Navalny among, for example, militaries or others. I mean, this is kind of a very old-fashioned approach, because all the people who support Alexey Navalny are not reading newspapers anymore. They're all online. They're on Facebook, they're on TikTok, they're on Instagram. And there is an army of people actually now in Russia who do not support Vladimir Putin. It doesn't mean that they do support Alexei Navalny. Me personally, I really have some questions to him. And though I don't think that he is a Bolshevik person or whatever he is, the problem in Russia is that we don't know, because Navalny is not he is not invited to the election. I mean, he is banned from taking part in the elections in Russia. We don't have opposition leaders on the elections. Never. Putin never takes part in debates. We don't have free press here. All the state-owned media services just do not say a word about the situation in the country, or they say that rallies and the gatherings on the streets are financed and supported and organized by CIA or something. I mean, this situation shows us that we don't know who Navalny is, but we want to have an opportunity to vote for him. And we do not have this kind of opportunity. This is not a democracy at all. It looks like an autocracy. This is why so many people are not happy here in this country.
Katerina Kopylova, just picking up on that first point that was made there by Katerina in Moscow, Does Vladimir Putin, he's 68 years old, he's been in power for 2 decades now, does he have a problem in that, yeah, you have these young activists who are tech savvy, who are very effective in getting their message across, and who are not of the same generation? Is Putin a little bit out of touch?
You know, I'm rather amused to hear people call Mr. Navalny an opposition leader. For me, he's not even a politician at all, simply because a politician in a democratic country, he has a political agenda. And this should be a positive political agenda. The only political agenda of Mr. Navalny is that Putin should leave the power. Well, I would rather hear him on the economics. I would rather hear him on the foreign policy. I would rather hear him on the interior policy, on the fight against terrorism, on the fight against pandemic. And yet he does not speak about that. That is why, in my humble opinion, he could not be called a politician, and that is why he could not be a threat to a real political leadership
Actually,
of Mr. Putin.
He does answer this question.
Can I just finish the sentence, please?
We have interviewed him lots of times.
All right, one at a time. First to Katerina Kopylova and then Katerina.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Yes, just to finish the sentence, that is why he is not a threat to a real political leadership of Mr. Putin, who remains the leader who is supported largely by the majority of Russians.
Katerina Kotikradze?
I'm really sorry to interrupt. I didn't want to. But the problem is that he is the only politician in this country who can actually be brave enough to be a problem for Vladimir Putin. And he really does answer all these questions. Years ago, yes, he was an anti-corruption activist, but now he is a person who is asked and he answers, for example, on TV Rain. Another thing is that the state-owned media never, ever invite him to answer the questions. He is banned from state-owned media. And Vladimir Putin never even says his name, never, ever. I mean, this is the problem with freedom of speech in this country. And going back to Mr. Navalny, he really has his own views, and he really has a concept, and he has an answer to the questions about the foreign policy, for example, about Ukraine, about international relations of Russian Federation. He is against sanctions, broad sanctions, for example. This is what we have heard from him recently, that he doesn't want the broad sanctions to be imposed. He is for the, personal sanctions about the personal sanctions against the inner circle of Vladimir Putin's friends and other people from his close area. But I would just don't trust the idea that Navalny is only about his video films about Putin's palace or other things like that. He is much more.
All right, the pressure at home, we've been talking about it. Let's talk a little bit about the pressure abroad. And let's first listen to Vladimir Putin. At his annual end-of-year marathon news conference in December, Putin was asked about the poisoning of Navalny. Then he was still in Germany, remember? And as always, the Russian president refused to mention him by name.
Если это так, а это так, я вас уверяю, это значит, что вот этот пациент берлинской клиники, он пользуется поддержкой спецслужб США в данном случае. А если это правильно, ну тогда это любопытно. Тогда спецслужбы, конечно, должны за ним присматривать. Но это совсем не значит, что его травить нужно. Кому он нужен-то? Понимаете? Если бы хотели, наверное, довели бы до конца.
If Russian services had wanted it, they would have accomplished the mission, says Putin. And in that statement, Greg Kapitas, he says, he again levels that accusation that he's supported by the special services of the United States.
Well, look, Francois, it's all a bunch of nonsense what Putin's talking, but those who are supporting Navalny, and I hope they're successful, but they need the military. This idea that it's some kind of out-of-date analysis of Russia, looking at it through the pages of Krasny Vezdya, the military newspaper, is naive, quite frankly.
But Craig, we've just been talking about the fact that you have it's sort of an intergenerational battle almost, where Navalny's not speaking through the same
Right.
media
Okay. All right. Fair enough.
as those close to Putin, perhaps.
Hey, Francois, I seem to remember us having this discussion, same discussion, a number of years back. What was it? Oh, yeah, Tahrir Square in downtown Cairo. How did that one end? Social media, as wonderful as it is at getting the message out, there's something I recalled when there was the French ambassador, since we're in France, the French ambassador to Russia, who was in St. Petersburg during the revolution. His name was Pelagius. And he said, if God does not spare us a revolution, it will be started not by the people, but by the army. That is how revolutions happen in Russia. They always have. Do I hope I'm wrong for the sake of the Russian people who want a democracy? You betcha. I'd love to eat my borscht, being wrong on this. I really would. But this is the way it works there.
All right, right now, again, talking about this, the foreign pressure that's being applied. It just so happened this Tuesday that the Swedish foreign minister was in Moscow, and Linda, urging the release of Navalny and a probe into the use of Novichok, while reminding our hosts that this isn't just Sweden's position, it's the common EU position. The Russian foreign ministry taking exception to foreign ambassadors being present in the courtroom for Navalny's trial. The spokesperson for the foreign ministry who posted on Facebook, let me remind you that traditionally diplomats in foreign courts support their citizens even if Westerners see Navalny as theirs. He's a citizen of the Russian Federation. This is no longer just an intervention in the internal affairs of a sovereign state. This is self-exposure to the unsightly and illegal role of the collective Wests in attempts to deter Russia. Now, Joe Biden's new Secretary of State, he insists that the Kremlin has it wrong when it comes to foreign intervention.
The Russian government makes a big mistake if it believes that this is about us. It's not. It's about them. It's about the government. It's about the frustration that the Russian people have with corruption, with kleptocracy.
Should the U.S. sanction the backers of Vladimir Putin as punishment for what has already happened to Navalny?
Actually, we're reviewing a series of Russian actions that are deeply, deeply disturbing.
Katerina Kopylova, your reaction to the words of Anthony Blinken?
Well, personally, I find those calls to release Navalny unconditionally and the presence of the foreign diplomats in the courtroom today quite inappropriate. I would wonder what would be the reaction of the French authorities if me, for example, Russian diplomat in France, would go assist to the verdict in the François Fillon's case, who is officially Emmanuel Macron's opponent. Those are internal Russian affairs. And again, this is not about a political trial. This is about someone who had simply violated the conditions of his parole release.
Again, while being at his hospital bed in Russia. But now you have this new U.S. administration that's coming in. Do you feel as though perhaps Russia's going to have less daylight to maneuver when it comes to these kinds of matters and this kind of pressure?
When it comes to these kinds of matters, Russia will have all the maneuvers that it wishes, simply because it concerns its internal affairs. And again, those ultimatums that are posed to Russia to release or not to release someone conditionally or unconditionally are simply inappropriate. And Russia would never permit itself to intervene in such a way to other countries' internal affairs.
Katerina Kotritadze, do you agree?
Of course not. Of course not. This is not a matter of the internal affairs. This is a matter of detaining. Of course it is. And no, of course it's not. It's a matter of political detention and political revenge for the only opposition leader that we have now, because others are already detained or out of country because they were forced to go somewhere abroad. The problem is that Alexey Navalny was brave enough to be alive and then to be back to Russia. He was warned that he would be murdered or detained when he comes back, and he still came back because he understands that he's a politician. And again, I'm not saying that he is the great politician and that he is the, that he is an ideal person or whatever. I'm just saying that he has a right as any citizen of Russian Federation to take part in the political life of his country, of the country where I am now, right now. And I'm seeing that there are police forces, a lot of police officers in the streets right now as I'm speaking to you guys in Moscow, and several stations of the subway are closed already, and several detentions are already done here in Moscow center because, we are in the middle of something very, very important. And there is no doubt that the international society needs to take a look on what's going on in Russia, because Russia is a part of the, for example, different agreements between, different agreements with the European Union, with the, European organizations, and so on and so forth. Russia needs to answer the questions, and Russia needs to be held and responsible for what's going on here. And when we have the, political opponent of the president, the person who wants to become one day a part of the election campaign to become a president of the state, when he is detained because of the case, which is an absolute hoax, and European Union and European Court of Human Rights declares that he is innocent, of course we need some kind of a reaction from the international society. We need to hear some pressure on Vladimir Putin, because this is not about some internal thing, which is, not important.
Craig Kapitas, does it make a difference whether it's Donald Trump or Joe Biden sitting in the White House?
Yes, it does, albeit that the sanctions will do nothing to curtail Putin. They haven't so far, and they won't in the future. Although it sounds nice and it looks good on social media, and you get a lot of Twitter hits calling for sanctions. What you have to do is cut off the money supply, which is a lot harder to do and a lot more dangerous. Going back even to the Bolsheviks, they had what were called quartermasters. That was actually the word for it in Russian. These were individuals in the West who would provide payment to support, the pre-Putin regimes. It existed in the 80s and in the 90s, and it still goes on. We talk here about Putin having all these bank accounts. I may be the odd man out here. I don't think if he has 5 bank accounts in the West, I'd be surprised. What he does, like all Russian leaders have, czars, he gives permission as the czar for others to put these great masses of wealth together, which he can tap into at any time. And of course, that wealth, even the ones that he might own personally, are shrouded in daisy-chained offshore companies, many as there are decimal points in pi. You can have an infinite number of those. And if the question, Francois, there is a nuclear option here that doesn't kill people. And it's an option that a lot of people are very frightened about even talking about. And that is Western governments going to SWIFT, the Society for Worldwide Interbank Financial Telecom Transactions, SWIFT. Now, what SWIFT is, it's a network of more than 11,000 banks. If you have a bank account, you got a SWIFT number. And they make about 35 million transactions globally a day.
All right, but if you squeeze Russia in that sense, in that case, Katerina Kopylova is right that Craig, it's the West deciding what kind of government Russia has.
No, I'm not suggesting, Francois. I am not for a moment suggesting that they trigger SWIFT. What I am asking. And I'd like to ask Katerina in Moscow, if I may, because she is there and we are not. Would the people in the street now supporting Navalny, would they be willing to have all financial transactions coming in and out of Russia stopped, cut off, until Navalny is released from jail and a democratic elections take place? That's my question.
If you allow me, I'm going to answer. Thank you for this question, because you are absolutely right. This is what we hear from, Western partners of Russia, that this kind of sanctions may be imposed, and this is a really bad idea. The people, if you ask them on the streets of Moscow, for example, they would not be happy, definitely, if this kind of sanctions would be imposed, because, this will come to every single of us. This will come to our houses, our homes, and this will actually impact our lives. And this is what we do not want here for any one of us. So that's why there is a conversation about the personal sanctions against the people who are really in the power. And this is what may happen, as I understand.
All right, it's a conversation we could continue for a long time. Unfortunately, we're out of time for this edition. I want to thank you, Katerina Kotrikadze, for being with us
Thank you.
From Moscow. I want to thank Ekaterina Kopylova here in Paris, as well as Craig Kapidis. Thank you for joining us here in the France 24 debate.
Mupaka.